Hunter Frontier to basically just be a re-release of Monster Hunter DOS. Players even started in the online hub town of Dundorma from DOS's release. This would later change to Mesoporta Square, which would be the main hub for the rest of future releases and would be updated throughout. The game seems to have had its first closed beta near the release of Monster Hunter Portable 2nd, and was meant to have an open beta release June 21st, 2007, but this was unfortunately postponed to June 28th as a technical test was required. One major feature to notice during these beta and tests was how wards and worlds worked. Players new to the game and just starting out could join servers for players that were HR 15 or lower, generally known as tutorial wards. Other players would be able to go to wards that allowed access to players HR 30 or lower. This allowed players to focus on playing with people closer to their skill level if they wished. It wouldn't be until July 5th, 2007 that the initial release of Season 1.0 was finally available. Let's take a look at some of the key features and monster additions from Season 1 to Season 1.5. The main features introduced in Season 1.0 were 2 new monsters and a new area to hunt within. First up, we have Hypnocatrice. If you watched my history video on the second generation of Monster Hunter, you may remember that 2 monsters originally introduced in Frontier made it over to the mainline portable series. One of these was Hypnocatrice, who only ever appeared outside of Frontier in one game, that being Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. It's a large bird wyvern that has the ability to knock players unconscious using its sleep sack and can deliver powerful kicks with its strong legs. Lavasioth was the second new addition to Monster Hunter and also made it over to mainline games through its initial appearance in Freedom Unite. Unlike Hypnocatrice, it managed to appear in future mainline releases in the series, but none of its subspecies or other Frontier-specific species have made it over as of yet. It's a Piscine wyvern that can live and swim through lava, using the magma as armor around its body as it hardens. Hypnocatrice was available day 1 with the release of Frontier Season 1.0, but Lavasioth wouldn't be accessible until August 8th. This would be the general release plan for all major and minor updates. Release these updates with all of the new monsters and content, but only make new monsters and content accessible every month or so in order to boost the playtime and longevity of the series. You see this in a lot of other MMOs as well to keep the people subscribed. The other big addition was the inclusion of the Great Forest area. This area also made it over to Freedom Unite and acts as a tropical rainforest setting the player will hunt monsters like Hypnocatrice in. Some of the events to make note of throughout Season 1.0's lifespan are the rollbacks required due to the inclusion of Protect Game Guard, the anti-cheat software used to prevent players from hacking the game. Apparently there was some issues with its inclusion that caused some sort of crash, resulting in a rollback around August 17th, 2007. Following this, there was also a large series of bans in September that were apparently accused of being false and unjust. Also due to the poor implementation of Protect Game Guard, which is notorious for being an awful anti-cheat software. I don't have many more details on these events as they were so long ago, but it wouldn't be the first time we've seen a game with a wave of bans that were not deserved. Along with all these new additions were monsters and areas previously seen in DOS. With the release of the 1.5 update on September 5th came other second generation monsters like Jan Garuga and Tigrex, although Scarred Jan Garuga is first gen. Along with the inclusion of returning monsters was the upgrade to Hunter rank. Originally, Hunter rank could only go up to 50, but now could reach the 51 to 99 range. One thing to note is that the seasons mechanic from DOS was also implemented by this point in the series. I won't go into detail about how it works, but if you want to know more, check out part 2 of my mainline history series, which goes over all of it. One of the aspects of this mechanic is breeding season, and on December 5th, 2 new monster additions were added, those being breeding season Hypnocatrice and the Red Lavasioth subspecies. Breeding season Hypnocatrice is very similar to your typical, but is considered a variant, a male Hypnocatrice that changes its color to a more vibrant pink hue during the mating season. It's faster than your typical Hypnocatrice and more resistant to damage. Red Lavasioth is a subspecies. True to its name, it's almost completely red on the top portion of its body and is stronger and faster compared to your typical Lavasioth. It also has the ability to shoot a trio of magma balls at hunters. One final thing I won't go into too much detail about are gallery decorations, which were best in slot armor skill decorations players unlocked through designing a custom room within the game. Through customizing this room space, players would be gifted some of the best decorations in the game, as well as farming upgrades through loyalty stamps players received through the creation and purchase of furniture. With these major additions out of the way, we can move on to the next major update, Season 2.0. Season 2 of Frontier was released January 30th, 2008 and really started to carve its own path in design and mechanics. In an interview, one of the developers stated, "I wonder if the original concept of Monster Hunter Frontier finally started in 2.0. Some of the biggest additions included were the implementation of Hunter Rank 100 to 199, as well as a new flying wyvern known as Espinus, and multiple quality of life features that I won't be going into too much detail about. Espinus is similar in design to Rathian, being able to both breathe fire and expose the player to the poison ailment. It can also paralyze hunters as well. Its body is covered in large pink spikes where its poison resides. When enraged, its veins will glow and be visible, similar to a Tigrex. Its fireballs have the ability to cause both poison and paralysis at the same time, making them incredibly dangerous. It's typically fairly passive, but once enraged becomes incredibly aggressive and uses all of its abilities against hunters. Another big addition was the inclusion of SP weapons, armor, and decorations. SP weapons were low rarity weapons that were required for specific special quests that would unlock access to other quests through their completion. The SP armor players could unlock was special in that they had no armor skills and only decoration slots. To make up for this, SP decorations, which could only be used on SP armor, were ridiculously strong. One could even offer plus 20 to expert. It can be noted that the addition of the variants and related new elements really marked a line in the sand for a lot of people about the direction that the series was going, and a lot of traditional Monster Hunter players began to drop the series at this point due to the new features and various balancing issues. The unique mechanic of weapon length was also introduced. Weapons could now vary in length between 5 basic sizes from very short to very long. These lengths would affect the hitboxes of the weapons, and generally the longer the weapon, the more usable it was, with some incredibly short weapons not being usable at all. Generally, long length was the most ideal. The 2.5 update was released April 23rd and brought with it a new Espinus subspecies, featuring warmer reds and yellows around its body in comparison to the cooler greens and pinks. On top of producing larger fireballs, this subspecies was also able to launch them from its feet and create gigantic explosions. On top of this, instead of paralysis, it could now inflict the defense down ailment to really deal damage to hunters. 2.5 also raised the HR cap all the way up to 999, with players unlocking almost all available content around HR 100. It seems like the Hunter Festival was also introduced with this update and was an event that lasted through the game's entire lifespan. The festival was a multi-week event where every guild within the server would get assigned to either a red team or a blue team. It's a rather intricate competition, so I won't go into too much detail about it here, but teams would compete to collect more souls through hunting monsters and other various means, and by meeting certain thresholds would be offered rewards. The winning team would get access to special quests for a week after the competition. Points could be earned and spent at a specific festival location attendant, which was incredibly useful for collecting rare G-rank monster parts. Some of the parts were only a 2% to 5% carve chance, so it was extremely useful. The point system specifically wasn't introduced until 3.0, however. Let's take a look at Season 3 now. Season 3 released July 2nd, 2008 and marked the 1-year anniversary of Frontier and included multiple new monsters, gameplay additions, and gameplay improvements. Felines had multiple updates, and player customization was improved with multiple new hairstyles. The players also obtained more customization options for their player homes, and armor color customization was finally introduced. It also brought with it a new hunting area known as Great Forest Peak, an arena area at the top of the giant tree within the Great Forest that was mostly home to the new Hypnocatrice edition by this point in the series. Speaking of that, 3.0 brought with it 2 new monster additions, one of these being Silver Hypnocatrice, a rare subspecies of Hypnocatrice which is much more powerful than its typical counterpart. It has better control over its sleep sac, more powerful kicks, and can cause tremors when it lands on the ground. Along with the new rare subspecies came Akura Vashimo, a brand new Carapacean monster similar to a scorpion, with large crystals growing around its body. On top of paralysis, it can also inflict a new ailment called crystallization, where the player will be covered in crystals that must be shaken off. Their max stamina will be lowered to the lowest level possible, and if they don't shake them off in time, they'll explode. One mechanic I haven't mentioned yet is friendship skills, where players with similar name icons based on armor colors would get specific buffs when in a quest together. This was quickly made obsolete, however. Additionally, servers that required players to have a maximum rank, known as expert districts, were also abolished. This season was also when service started in Korea, although it only lasted there for 3 years. Season 3.5 released September 3rd, 2008, and brought with it a new monster as well as the inclusion of the Versus Quests mechanic in dailies. Akira jebbia was a new carapacean similar to Akira vishimu, but not a subspecies. Think Hermitar and Chianatar from the mainline games. It is white and blue in color in comparison to the purple of vishimu, and can also inflict the crystallization status ailment. It's stronger and faster in comparison to vishimu and can throw its crystals as explosive projectiles. Versus quests functioned as a competitive race to hunt a monster the fastest. Within this mode, 2 groups of 2 would enter a single map together, however each team's map would be instanced. Basically, the teams could see where the opponents were on the map, but not interact with them or their monsters. The goal seems to have been to hunt the target monster before the other team manages to do so, and players could use items on opposing teams for various negative effects. We're moving on to 4.0 now, and I just want to point out that all of these designs for monsters so far I could fully expect to see in any mainline Monster Hunter title. I think the series gets a lot of flack for its monster designs and gameplay, but realistically there's a good portion of the game by this point that any mainline hunter would enjoy. 4.0 was released December 17th, 2008. For a good amount of content up to this point, well-known video game producer Yoshinori Ono had been working on the series. Ono is best known for his work as producer and executive producer on many of the Street Fighter games, and was even the producer on the cancelled Deep Down title from Capcom. Ono stepped down during 4.0 and was replaced by Kazunori Sugiura, who has worked as a producer on many Pokemon titles including Mystery Dungeon, Masters, and Shuffle. First bit of new content to note is a new hunting area called the Gorge, which changed from a sunny day to rain and thunderstorms at night. The area features 2 specific types of cacti, which when consumed can offer defense and attack boosts to the player. It was also one of the first areas to have destructible environments that the player may need to get through to access the rest of the map, such as long tough grass that could only be destroyed through slashing weapons like longsword. The next big addition was the inclusion of a new thunder element wyvern known as Beru Kirurosu, a large flying wyvern with a single horn on the top of its head and long tendrils on each of its wings. It has many electrical attacks, but the most notable is the lightning beam it shoots, similar to that of a Rajang. It has quest-specific behaviors, so it does not always act the same when hunted, and when enraged, perform a dive bomb maneuver which creates a large explosion around the surrounding area. By this point, Beru Kirurosu lives specifically within the new Gorge area. Something to note as well is that previous monsters from mainline inclusions of the series were still being implemented within these updates. Not only that, but these monsters may even get reworked moves or new moves altogether. For example, Teostra was made more difficult by giving its fire breath a longer range and wider explosion area. Poogie also marked its inclusion as a support character by this point in the updates, but having it depart with you was dependent on a spawn rate. The Poogie could often get sick and refuse to go on quests, but there was ways to cure this. Similar to Palicos, Poogies could come out on missions and even be able to get extra monster cards out of hunts for you. Poogie even had its own skills to boost its effects when out in the field with you. Poogie could even consume potions instantly for hunters to heal them when they were in a pinch. It seems that at this point a time-based free-to-play mechanic was added, maybe a trial period of some sort, but it seems more like it was a severely limited free mode that locked players out of most of the content. The development team was also getting a lot of backlash from fans due to the broken promise of items never being purchasable. What those items are, I'm not sure, but adding a real currency shop left a bad taste in players' mouths. A lot of players at the time considered this a turning point for the series and was thought to cause a second wave of players dropping the game altogether. Despite this, it was revealed that there was actually an increase to player population at this time, most likely not from traditional mainline fans, but other players starting to see interest in the absurd power scaling. Season 5 was released on April 9th, 2009 and brought with it the removal of Dundorma and a renovation to Mesoporta Square, further solidifying that Frontier was moving away from aspects of the old games. Paria is a brand new water element flying wyvern introduced in this update. Surprisingly, it is not considered a Piscean wyvern or a leviathan despite its fish-like appearance. It's considered a glutton and will eat most food around it. After eating too much, it can regurgitate the food, which can then sometimes be gathered through by hunters for additional rewards. Hunters can actually gauge what type of food it wants to eat based on the color of its drool, and if constantly fed effectively, it will become overly full and be forced to ignore hunters and digest. Hunters can interrupt this by attacking or flinching the enemy, causing it to use the food within it as a weapon. Season 5.5 released June 17, 2009 and marked the second anniversary of the Frontier series. It not only brought a new rare species, but the intricate Rasta system. The Rasta system was a way for hunters to bring along AI companions into hunts instead of requiring additional real player characters. Rastas were available after HR 11, and by taking them with you on hunts, players would earn points which would allow them to buy better equipment for the Rastas. Players can set up their own Rastas, but have the ability to contract other players as well. How the Rastas function and act within a hunt is dependent on the hunters you are contracting from. The white Espinus rare species was finally introduced into the series with this release as well. It now has the ability to inflict poison, paralysis, and defense down ailments on top of its typical fire abilities. It has better accuracy with these moves as well. It has a super ability where it flies into the air and unleashes a huge poison fireball to the ground below. Players then need to trip the Espinus, otherwise the areas it stomps on will be left with a fiery poison area in effect, making hunter mobility more difficult. While the previous two Espinus have been rather passive until enraged, this rare species will be enraged as soon as it wakes up. Another inclusion to Season 5 are Hunter Gems or Hunter Pearls. Basically, hunters would have colors assigned to them, and each day, a monster type would be assigned to a specific color. Let's say that Elder Dragons were assigned to green. By hunting Elder Dragons, you would raise the points in that specific color. If you were assigned the green color, you could get bonus points as well. By raising the cap of all colors, you would be able to move on to the next rank of your Pearl, and there were 9 ranks in total. The level of your Pearl would correlate with the amount of extra bonus skills you could equip, such as not flinching when initially sighted by a monster, or no stamina reduction when climbing. This was done through the new caravan site area, which included the required quests, known as caravan quests. Players would have to be at least HR 17 to participate. Capping the color to rank up the gem isn't the only requirement, however. Players must earn caravan points and spend them to properly rank their gem up. If it hasn't been obvious by this point, Monster Hunter Frontier offered an incredible amount of content almost every month, and while the monsters started to get more intricate in both their design and abilities, the abilities of hunters did the same. From new decorations, new armors, new weapons, and abilities. Weapon length specifically is something I could definitely see in a mainline series, and the same can be said about the Rasta system. Maybe a system where we could take AI versions of friends we've made online and receive the guild cards of. I think a lot of hunters that hate on Frontier generally criticize it for similar reasons that I criticized Worlds for. The series does in the future start to get faster paced, aggressive, and kind of absurd with the power of monsters and their abilities. But something you should keep in mind is that Frontier is in the mainline game, and it's a cool look at what these developers have come up with and think about how they could be implemented into a mainline game. Even with how excessive some of the content gets in the future, looking at Frontier from 2007 to 2009, I can say that they really keep the atmosphere and the feel of the old school core Monster Hunter experience. As you can see by the category, we're going to be getting right into each season and covering what they brought to Frontier. In my previous video, we discussed the development history pre-Frontier's release, but now that we're in the thick of it, we'll be discussing additions and design choices starting at Season 6 onward. September 16th marked the release of Season 6.0, which brought with it 2 new monsters that were hunted together, Nono and Camu Orogaran. Similar to how players would hunt Teostra and Lunastra together, or Rathian and Rathalos. Nono Orogaran is a wolf-like fanged beast with white fur. Nonos seem to always be female and hang around near Camu Orogaran, which is a similar male equivalent with black fur. Both are ice elemental monsters, but this only seems to be the case in an update later on in the series through Monster Hunter G Genuine. Despite not being Elder Dragons, these monsters have the ability to evade pitfall traps. While similar to pairings like Teostra and Lunastra or Rathian and Rathalos, Nono and Camu are unique in that they are designed to never leave each other's sides during the entire duration of the quest. Though there are quests in the future where they are hunted separately. When either of these monsters die, the remaining partner will let out a roar in despair and rage. Sword crystals seem to be added in this update as well. Think oils in Monster Hunter Generations. Essentially, if you had this specific armor skill, you'd be allowed to use sword crystals on your weapons and effectively change the element or ailment of the weapon at the cost of significant sharpness degradation. About 3 times the normal amount. However, this was only basically applied and didn't seem to be fully implemented within 6.0. Rastas previously didn't have the ability to use every weapon type, but this changes in Season 6.0. Now Rastas had access to all 11 weapons within the game. Finally, the introduction to Gao weapons seemed to appear within this update. These weapons required armor sets to get the most out of them. By equipping the weapon, each piece of related armor equipped would offer an additional plus 15 attack, plus 2% status, and plus 2% elemental. The fist.moe website points out that this stacks per piece, allowing for a maximum of plus 80 attack, plus 10% status, and plus 10% elemental. These weapons were especially useful for gunners and defined the meta sets for them. The means of getting some of this equipment was through the inclusion of Gao Elders, which were previously released Elder Dragons from DOS that were a bit easier. Razor Sharp Plus 2 was also introduced. With all of these new features out of the way, let's move on to Season 7.0 and the introduction of a frontier staple monster, Raviente. Season 7 was released December 9th, 2009 and had a lot of new features added within. One major feature was the introduction of skill cuffs, which you would attach to your Poogie to bestow armor skill points onto yourself. Think charms in traditional mainline Monster Hunter games, but without the randomization. You would create the cuffs you wanted and then attach them when necessary. Stamps were also introduced within this update and were used as a means of rewarding players for being consistently subbed to the game. Each week of a player's sub, they would receive a stamp which could be turned in for specific ticket items. Players couldn't just be subbed normally to qualify either. They needed both the traditional sub and the extra EX sub to receive rewards. By collecting for a full year, players could use the tickets to purchase yearly equipment pieces, but I'm unsure of their effectiveness. So what's an EX sub? Implemented in earlier updates, EX Course was an additional sub tier on top of your traditional HL or Hunter Life subscription model, and offered various bonuses to the player, like certain consumables always being purchasable and some expensive items becoming either free or 50% off. It also offered access to town boxes, which functioned similarly to current mainline games. Players without EX subscription would have to cancel a quest, run back to their house or smith, and get whatever they needed if they forgot items. EX placed these boxes within the town itself, making it easier to grab items without needing to abandon a quest. EX placed these boxes within the town itself, making it easier to grab items without needing to abandon a quest. A welcome inclusion that was unfortunately walled off as a paid service. EX even gated hairstyles of all things, and locked off specific gathering and material quests. So who is Raviente? Well, it's an incredibly large snake-like monster that does not have a typical classification. It's not a snake wyvern and it's not an elder dragon despite its enormous size. This monster was actually a server event and required multiple hunting groups of 4 to take it down, similar to what we see with sieges in Monster Hunter World. The monster was seriously enormous and was such a unique inclusion that there was even another EX service that could be unlocked to help deal with hunting with it. Within the caravan area was a cat, and if you were taking part in the event, you could feed the cat specific items to offer boosts to everyone participating against Ravi, such as poisoning or sedating it. The monster had multiple phases, and after the 4th and 7th phase respectively, it would switch locations within the new area you hunted it in. There's many other smaller notes and nuances to this monster, but that will probably be saved for its own dedicated video. The new area is known as Solitude Island, and worked as 3 large arenas that Raviente would switch throughout the phases. The hunters would start within the hunter camp and would move immediately to the main hunting area. Now, the wiki will tell you that hardcore monsters made their appearance in Season 7, which is incorrect. Rather, there were 2 monster variants that weren't actually classified as such, including Blangonga and Diablos. I believe Golden Rathian and Silver Rathalos were included as well. These were SP specific quests and not actually hardcore. The reason these weren't hardcore is because the true classification first showed up in Season 8. You'll understand why shortly. Season 8.0 released April 21st, 2010 and brought back the sub-updates with 8.5. The main features introduced in 8.0 were a new monster, and with it a new arena area to fight it within. Diaragua is the new monster edition and an ice element flying wyvern. It is very similar in appearance to Tigrex, but the color scheme and horns help it also resemble a Zinogre. Despite this, it is said that the head resembles that of a fox. Its tail is large and blunt, similar to that of a club, which can smash down at opponents. elements. Other than generic melee attacks, Deer Agua introduced Frostbite, which functions similar to the Ice Blight ailment in mainline games. On top of Frostbite, it could also produce sleep after a backflip. Finally, the monster had the ability to stand in place and wait for hunters to attack it. If attacked, it would immediately perform a devastating counter move that would put hunters into an elevated stun state. Instead of the traditional stars over their heads, hunters would actually collapse to their knees for an extended period. Deer Agua was hunted within a new section of the tower known as the Nest Hole, which was again another arena location to hunt specific monsters in. Seemed like a going theme for the past few updates, honestly. It can be noted that in May, the Xbox 360 version of Frontier had its closed beta start after a short delay due to some sort of defect discovered within the game. An interesting note is that the player base apparently had an unexpectedly high amount of male characters being used compared to female characters. June 22nd, 2010 brought the Season 8.5 update, and a few days later the full release of the Xbox 360 edition of Frontier. A subspecies of Beru Gyorosu was introduced in 8.5 known as Dora Gyorosu. It offered an even more advanced moveset in comparison to your typical Beru. Despite using Dragon Element instead of Thunder, Doru has the ability to paralyze hunters. It has a more green hue to its body in comparison to Beru, who is more yellow and pink. This was also the 3rd anniversary for the series, and multiple events were held to celebrate. A big addition to note is that Season 8.0 was the first to introduce the concept of hardcore monsters, which were originally generally used to rework mainline monsters into more difficult variations with multiple visual differences. To access hardcore monsters, you would need to turn the feature on when posting the quest for the original monster. These monsters weren't just stronger though, their part break thresholds were higher and traps barely worked on them, often lasting only around a second. They even only took half the normal status ailments, and their carves were within the 1% to 5% range. Now, to access hardcore monsters, you needed to have access to style rank, and its requirement implies that styles were originally introduced in 8. Originally, style rank unlocked at HR 500, later 300, and finally HR 5 with some hunter rank reworks. Players could enter style rank and would be limited to what equipment they could use. They could even enter SR specific quests and set them to hardcore if they preferred. Now, the benefit of this style rank was the introduction of weapon styles, which were completely reworked and new movesets for all the weapon types within the game. For example, players would now have access to the Heaven style for each weapon and could change them by equipping a new item known as Secret Notes or Secret Book. These styles changed how the weapons functioned, but differently in comparison to styles from generations. While a generation-specific style focused on a given theme that would be applied to all weapons similarly, the styles in Frontier were specific to the weapons equipped. Season 8 brought with it 4 new hardcore monsters. Hardcore Kongolala, which now has pink claws as well as a pink hue on the top of its head cone. It can now hurl multiple large pieces of dung at the player and will bounce around the area multiple times, unleashing large gas clouds as it does so. The gas is so powerful that it creates dragon strength wind. Hardcore Kezu. With brown spots and large blue veins around its body, it basically gets access to its electrical balls during multiple normal attacks it performs and can paralyze hunters with a short but powerful roar. Getting paralyzed can prove fatal considering how aggressive the attacks on this monster tend to be. Hardcore Lavasiath, which looks fairly similar to its normal counterpart but has access to more fireball moves as well as a double body slam maneuver. Hardcore Yan Kutku, which is pinker overall and will charge and rampage around the map. Its main new ability is a fireball that will create a wall of fire after landing. Oh wow, we actually got a new full area in the Season 9.0 update, which released September 29th, 2010. The new area was known as Highland and consists mostly of plateaus around rocky cliffsides. However, the area is incredibly high up, and looking over the edge of the plateaus shows a sea of clouds. There are a few other locations of note within the area, with a small forest at the summit of the area and some caves that contain multiple stone pillars. It's a really beautiful spot and is covered in various waterfalls throughout. Highland is home to 2 new herbivore species introduced in Frontier, known as Yurupe and Baruku. Europe, or Europe, I'm not completely sure, are deer or antelope-like species similar to Kelpie, and Baruku are similar to buffalo. Gurenze Buru is a new flying wyvern introduced in Season 9 of Monster Hunter Frontier and has a sharp horned head similar to Xantrios when it's in its ice armor form. It uses said horn as its primary means of attacking prey and hunters, often charging at them. It has a water element, which it uses to its advantage through attacks like water beams and balls, similar to Plesioth. It even has the iconic hip check maneuver. It has a paralysis gas it can release and can also shoot spikes into the ground from its tail, which act as electrical landmines, but only when it is storming, which is fairly common within the Highlands. They're actually fairly peaceful, but will become rather aggressive once attacked or if the weather is storming. Season 9 also had its own set of hardcore monsters and would be the first season to offer Frontier-specific monsters with hardcore status. Hardcore Bessarios, which has a branch in one of its rocks on its back, as well as bright blue eyes and purple spots on its stomach. Not only can it fire 3 heat beams in succession, but now can roll and emit poison at the same time, as well as dig underground before resurfacing to shoot a powerful fireball. Hardcore Daimyo Hermitar, which looks similar to the normal monster but with new attacks, such as having a water beam of extended length, as well as running back and forth while swinging its claws around. The Espina subspecies also received a hardcore version, where the spikes around its body are now longer down its back and has more spikes overall on its wings. This hardcore species actually showed up before Hardcore Espinus, which arrives in Season 10. It can charge a large fireball that it will shoot into the sky before multiple other fireballs begin to rain down. Hardcore Hypnocatrice is more pink than orange and can produce stronger winds than your typical version. Hardcore Paria Puria has a darker, more saturated color scheme and has a vortex attack that can pull in hunters. It can perform multiple new moves after sucking a hunter in, like spitting vomit on them or swinging its head back and forth in a wider range. Why would you make a hardcore Plesioth? It's cursed. Visually, it's very similar to your typical Plesioth, but with a darker tint and more muscle mass. It has a bunch of new aggressive moves, but the craziest thing is that it can U-turn mid-air when jumping. Hardcore Teostra is next, and the first hardcore Elder Dragon, with an even longer flamethrower attack than the updated Teostra for Frontier. He can also cover various areas of the map in explosive powder and make them explode at will. One other major feature is that he can cover himself in a fire tornado while roaring, entering rage mode or activating its fire aura. Hardcore Tigrex comes equipped with larger horns, but is missing one of its eyes. It has many new moves, but most notably its roar is stronger and has increased range. And it has the ability to do a double 360-degree spin attack. One of the biggest additions to Season 10, which released January 26, 2011, was weapons gaining additional moves and functionality. Some of these animations were actually reused for Monster Hunter Tri. The Moat Arena for Monster Hunter Freedom Unite was also brought over in this inclusion. Due to the amount of effort and design that went into each weapon receiving new moves, there was no additional flagship monster included with this update. However, there were plenty of hardcore monsters introduced, which we will go over now. First, we have Hardcore Azur Rathalos, whose spikes have been developed further than your typical monster and has the ability to spit out 7 fireballs in a row. Next is Hardcore Chameleos, and the second Elder Dragon to have a hardcore variation. It has a sweet combo maneuver where it launches the hunter towards it and spits poison at them while they're in midair. Hardcore Diaragua has more vibrant color and more saturated horns and claws. It basically has all the same moves, but doubled or tripled in use, and they're even faster than before. The original Espinus finally received a hardcore variation as well. It's faster and stronger than your typical Espinus and has more pronounced bodily features. Hardcore Gypsaros has a larger tail and poison stains around its face. On top of being able to pretend it's dead, it can now also fake paralysis and fake sleep depending on which status ailments hunters are using at the time. Hardcore Kirin is surrounded by electricity at all times and has a large range of new electrical attacks that are even more accurate than before. One of its charge attacks is so fast it almost looks like it teleports. Hardcore Monoblos is a little more unique in design, with longer horns and red marks on the top of its head and horn. It has a ground slam maneuver and it can immediately charge out of it for a horn attack. For some reason, they thought it was a good idea to introduce a hardcore variation of Rajang. It has multiple new moves, such as being able to spin around and leap across the entire area, and homing punches that will create electricity on impact. Hardcore Shogun Shianatar is a little more tame than Rajang and can spray poison from the front and spit some from the back of its Gravio shell. It can cause quakes while attacking, which prevent the hunter from escaping. Hardcore Velocidrome has multiple small visual differences, such as its new crest shape at the top of its head and its red eyes. It can also cause quakes like the Shianatar and has multiple new tackle-like moves. And finally, Hardcore Yan Garuga, with a poison-stained beak and new moves like performing a tail whip while also releasing a poison mist around it. It can also scream during some of these moves. Another thing to note about Season 10 is that it introduced Storm style, so players now had access to Heaven, Storm, and Earth. For clarification, Earth style is your basic run-of-the-mill moveset. On February 2nd, 2011, the Naked Hunter knife incident occurred, in which individuals who participated in the Raviente event were forced to HR 999, equipped with a Naked Hunter knife, and seemed to lose access to all of their equipment and items. Victims were left like this for weeks apparently, and these players were eventually rolled back after emergency maintenance. We've now officially covered all of the season's era of Monster Hunter Frontier. I think that the inclusion of the hardcore monsters is where we really start to see the excessive design aspects of monsters start to come to light, but this still isn't much different from what we would see in Deviants within generations. Even the flagships that get introduced don't come off as excessively designed to me. Rather, they again offer some features I'd like to see more of in future games, such as weather-specific moves or monsters having the ability to counter. The gimmick with Nana and Kami would also be a fantastic inclusion for a new species within the mainline series. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't vilify the series too much for the wrong reasons. A lot of the features we see in Frontier mirror a lot of the issues I had with Monster Hunter World, but their inclusion in this game seems more developed and acceptable for a non-mainline MMO. It's creative and cool and sticks to the old school style and controls we expect from older generation Monster Hunter games. It seems to manage to hold the atmosphere and aesthetic some of us miss within the series.